Hi, I'm Ruth Roland from Kangath Knits, and today I'm going to talk about fixing mistakes and weaving in ends in tapestry knitting. Now there are some special mistakes that you can make in tapestry knitting that you're more likely to make in tapestry knitting than in normal stranded knitting. And one of them is stranding on the wrong side. In fact, that's the primary one. So, say you started to strand on the wrong side, and you see here there are blue strands in front of the knitting, and here there isn't one. You noticed right away, go ahead and unknit, and then just flip the strand over and be on your merry way. Okay. Now that didn't totally fix it. But we'll do that on the next row. Knitting the garter border here. And you can, if you want to totally fix it on the same row, all you do is slide your stitches over to the other needle and then flip the float over to the other side. And now here we're at the mistake that we almost all the way fixed, and we just make sure the float stays on the side that we want it on. And we know it's a blue float, so it stays on the blue side. Blue float stays on the blue side. Yes. And it's fixed. Okay. 2 blue floats. Okay, good. Now, this one isn't fixed yet, so we'll just take it over there. And it's basically the same. Okay. Except you noticed the mistake on the second row. So you can fix it easily from the first row or the second row. Oops. But what if you made it a few rows down? So see this float here, a few rows down. You can just actually unknit those stitches, rip those stitches down. Actually, I'm going to get my cable needle here, or double pointed needle, and pick up the stitches right above that float. Three and 4, because these floats are 4 stitches long. Okay. And then rip down. I'm using my other needle here, the other end of my needle, to help rip. Okay. A little bit felted. This is a nice fuzzy yarn. Okay, good. And then I flip the float to the other side of the stitches Okay. Oops, there's one stitch that didn't manage to rip out entirely. There we go. Okay. Alright, so the floats are all on the correct side of the knitting. And that's what it looks like from the other side. Okay. Now, we check to see the order of the contrasting color strands. And the order of the main color strands. Okay. The next thing we want, there it is. Okay. The next thing we want is, the next strands we want to use are these strands. Now we see under here that the stitch below this stitch on the double pointed needle is a blue stitch, and they're alternating. Every 4 stitches they alternate blue, well, main color, contrast color, main color, contrast color. So it's time for a main color stitch. Okay? And then I'll let the float fall on the main color side and just purl. Okay. The rest of the stitches. Okay, good. Now, being careful to leave the floats in front, I'm just going to knit across with the next contrast color stitch in line. Okay, next contrast color float. Good. And I use this double pointed needle. I think if you had 10 rows or something to rip down, I would use 2 double pointed needles. But just for this many, it's okay. And I'm being very careful. I don't like to try to fix a mistake and actually be making a worse mistake the whole time I'm fixing it. So I'm very careful to find the correct main color strand. Oops. And I want the contrast color float on this side. There. Okay. And you do have to be careful, but it is relatively easy to fix. But I'll show you another way to fix this kind of problem. Okay, if you prefer. Okay, and then this is contrast color all the way across. And we have, whoops, No, I think that's right. I thought I was going to say I had made a mistake deciding which strands went with which. Alright, and this looks kind of uneven stitches and that kind of thing. You can even them up with a double pointed needle, or you can hope that it evens out with blocking. But it's all the floats are in the right place. Well, the other thing, one other thing you can do is pull the stitches into the right shape for that top row anyway. So I'm going to finish this row. And then I'll show you a mistake I made further down. Okay. So like I said, I wouldn't do more than rip down more than 10 rows of tapestry knitting. You know, use your judgment. If it's 11 rows, you know, and looks pretty easy, go ahead, do it if you want. If you like this method of fixing, I wouldn't rip down use the rip down method if there's any shaping, if there are any decreases or increases. That gets very messy very quickly. Alright, so let me see if I can find my mistake. It's in the edging, but you can use this same method of fixing mistakes. Here it is. You see how I have two main color strands coming out of each of these kind of running stitch motifs, and there's one stray strand, and I noticed it when I was about here, and I don't think I couldn't figure out a way to do it with only ripping down a few stitches, because I have to take the yarn around the contrast color, around the main color, and I just didn't. So what I'll do instead, I can still fix it. What I would have done if it had been only two rows up or 3 rows up, I would have just ripped out. I break the yarn and take my yarn needle and run it through where it's supposed to go. Okay. And then splice the ends together. Okay, and there are different ways to do this. This is Unique Sheep, Green Sheep Sport, and it felts, if you look at it the right way. I love this yarn though. It's very, very soft. Okay. Nice and sticky yarn though, and I don't have to be really careful with it to splice it, but use your preferred method of splicing. If you're using some kind of non-wool yarn, there are methods of splicing. You can just separate it into strands, the yarn into plies, or pieces if it's single ply, and then well, actually, what I do first, because this is always going to be a short piece, I run the needle through the yarn, in and out, in and out, in and out. Okay, and then thread, apply onto the needle. This is for non-wool yarn. This is for yarn that doesn't spit splice well. There you go. And then do that for all the strands. Okay. But since this yarn, with this yarn I can spit splice. Also, you know, some people don't like to spit splice. If you haven't heard of spit splicing before, I'll show you what that means. I'm just gonna moisten my fingers with the saliva here, and then rub. And I can just rub it between my thumb and finger, and I don't have to be careful about rubbing it always the same direction. You know, some people tell you it has to be always S's or Z's depending on what your yarn is, and I haven't found that to be necessary, especially in these little bits here. It's hard to control. Okay, and then since we pulled a lot, we pulled these stitches very, very tight, I'm going to take some care and ease them. Oh wow, you can just hear them sighing with relief. Okay. So I'll go ahead and do this. Finish this easing on my own time. I wanted to show you how I got it started. And this garter stitch, I find easing stitches in garter stitch to be especially intricate work, you know. There. You have to find the nub that you want to ease, and sometimes it's pulled so tight that you don't recognize it as the right nub, or okay, so like I said, I'll finish this on my own time. I'll show you a little bit of easing the other side. This is easier because these are floats. And your finished yarn may be a little bit shorter, but I find the wool stretches as well. So even though you just spliced two ends together, it's stretchy. Okay, well I'll finish that in a bit. So the steps were to break the yarn or cut the yarn, depending on what kind of yarn it is. I find that spit splicing works better with broken ends. Otherwise, you have to manually fray the ends, so you can cut it too. And then thread the yarn through where you want it to go. And you know, this also works for ones where if I found a float on the wrong side down here and I was already up here, that will work for that. So thread the yarn where you want it to go, and then splice it together, and then straighten up the stitches. Okay, good. So now weaving in ends, and this garment is particularly easy to weave in ends, rather invisibly. I don't do it straight from the corner, although you're obviously welcome to. I find that if people are looking for ends, they often look at the corner. I'm going to go ahead and just do some up through a stitch and down through the next stitch and up through the stitch, and the stitches I'm talking about are the U parts of the stitch, right? There are smiles and frowns, and I'm going through the smiles. Okay, and let's see, that's probably enough for this portion. Okay. And I'm careful to pull it so the thread's fairly loose. It's less visible that way, I find. And then I'm just going through diagonally every other one. Okay. This is not a special method of weaving in ends at all. And then when I get up here, I can go under these floats. Through a stitch, but under the float, through a stitch and under the float. Through a stitch and under the float. Okay. Now I find that with this semi-solid yarn, the border was particularly dark, so I may not have chosen the best place to come up diagonally. In fact, I might undo this. The border is dark, and the yarn I'm weaving in is light. In fact, maybe if I continue with the U's, the smiles, it will be less visible. Let's try that. Okay, well, I think that's not too bad. Maybe the best we can get. This is, after all, a single layer of a single color of knitting, so it's hard to disguise the ends. But like I said, once we get up here, we have floats to hide behind, and we're going to go ahead and take advantage of them. There aren't many floats on this side of the fabric, but when there are, you can hide behind. Okay, and you can go under the stitch or directly pierce it and go through. Alright, and the other side. Looks like that you can't even see it from the other side. Alright. And this end, I'm treating the same way. Actually, I'm going to go around to the other side of the knitting. Just to start that end, and come back through, and I've disguised it as a piece of this running stitch. Oops. Yes. I'm going to go ahead and thread the needle through first. Okay. And now we're home free again, going behind the floats to keep the garment reversible. Now you see I'm taking the main color stitches and going under them, under a main color stitch and under a contrast color float. Okay, one more. Okay, so not visible at all from the A side. Again, there's a little bit of visibility. From the B side, there will be even less after blocking. Alright, good. Now go with your own.